Thank you, Shaza. So I guess now, with the focus on communications campaigner at Myhutan, I welcome Aidil Iman. But I think before that, may I please have Aidil, if you can raise up your hand so we can always have you at the first panel. Yes, that looks great. And so I guess I pass the floor to you, Aidil Iman.
All right, thank you so much. So thank you so much for inviting me today. I'm really excited to talk about it, and I'm really inspired after hearing Howard's remarks on environmental democracy. She does great work at Kuasa alongside Shakila. So the environmentalist landscape in Malaysia is quite really small. A lot of people know each other. So let me just share my screen firsthand. So you can see here, right, already? Okay, great. So I'll be talking about this concept called #Generation Restoration. So the United Nations decided that 2021 until 2030 will be the decade on ecosystem restoration, that we will be the generation for ecosystem restoration. So my expertise lies in communications and social media engagement. So today's topic is particularly representing Myhutan, an initiative led by young people under Undi 18 that mobilizes sustainable financing for forest conservation. I am a communications campaigner there. So definitely today I will be talking about utilizing social media for climate action, environmental justice, and biodiversity protection. So we know that young people such as Howard and other environmentalists from other organizations like Climate Action, Eco Nights, and Project Vocal have always been at the forefront of change. From the climate strikes in 2019 and the Penang Tolak Tambak protest, when Howard showed a picture of her at protesting there with her friends from Kuasa, as well as online solidarity against the Kuala Langat North Forest Reserve degazettement plans. So from these issues, we know that Malaysian youth have always been at the front of environmentalist movements. We know and acknowledge that young Malaysians are curators of petitions, protests, discussions, and most importantly, resistance or confrontation against unsustainable development. But at the same time, young Malaysians are lacking space in terms of making decisions. In that being said, young people, including children, must have a place across decision-making, leadership, and policies surrounding the climate crisis, biodiversity crisis, and other forms of environmental degradation. So we know that social media is a big tool in spreading awareness and advocacy. So social media is really crucial for political engagement and community support. So I was born in 1999, so that makes me from Generation Z. So the previous perspective on Generation Z is that we are supposed to be thought as apolitical, that we are not politically involved in any forms of issues, right? But social media campaigns launched to response of the public health crisis, such as the COVID-19, proved otherwise. You know, it is based on community efforts where there has been movements like #Bendera Putih, #Kita Jaga Kita, and as well as the most important protest that has happened recently, the Lawan protest. A lot of them has been joined by young people, started by young people, led by young people, and are for young and all Malaysians. So we saw like this massive movement of people using social media as a tool to raise flags, whether they were white or whether they were black. So youth are definitely using social media for their advantage in terms of advocacy, networking, but most importantly, resistance against the failure of governance. So I will use an example of the case of the Kuala Langat North Forest Reserve. We know that for the past year that the Kuala Langat North Forest Reserve being degazetted was a big issue, was a big environmental issue, not only because it was one of the last remaining peat forests in Selangor, but it was also the home for the Tamiar people, an indigenous group living nearby the forest. So there has been a lot of environmental movements against the degazettement of Kuala Langat North Forest Reserve, especially from NGOs from where I am from, Myhutan, Kuasa included, Climate Action, Five Arts Movement, and other organizations and civil societies coming together to go against the degazettement plans. So only this year, we were notified that the Kuala Langat North Forest Reserve was already degazetted before we knew about it, before indigenous people knew about it. So this was a case of breach of trust. This was a breach of accountability. This was not transparent at all. So Malaysians took on to themselves, because we couldn't go out in the streets to protest. A lot of people started making noise on social media, especially on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. So people started using posters like this one, designed by Missy Solidarity, to spread awareness, and to spread advocacy, and to deny and to ask for the stop of the degazettement plans and the development projects. Fortunately, very fortunately, this is a very landmark victory in decision by the Selangor state government, that the Kuala Langat North Forest Reserve will be re-gazetted, and that the development projects will be stopped immediately. So this is the press statement made by the Menteri Besar of Selangor, saying that the Kuala Langat North Forest Reserve will not be having any development projects in the near future, and that it will be re-gazetted soon. So this is, of course, a victory for environmentalists everywhere, but especially the indigenous peoples living in that area. There have been a lot of victories as well. For example, the EIA, or the Environmental Impact Assessment for the Penang Reclamation Project, being revoked due to fishermen in the Penang, in the local area, being involved in environmental litigation. So it's been a great year. It's been a great, I guess, previous month for environmental victories. So social media as a tool for advocacy is really important. The first one is, of course, to design infographics. So infographics is a way for you to share about environmental issues, solutions, crises, or any problems related to the environment on a way that is visually pleasing. So these are some infographics that Myhutan has done. So infographics work best on platforms such as Instagram and Twitter. So when you design infographics, you need to acknowledge which platform that you can do it well, right? So you don't have to be a graphic designer to be doing designs like infographics. You can use free apps like Canva, which have accessible designs, which have really great creative elements. But it's important when you're designing infographics, you have to use attention-grabbing headlines, to make issues like deforestation personal to people and to yourself as well. Designing infographic is an art in itself. You have to be short but concise and straightforward. There are always inspirations to come, not to follow, but not to plagiarize, of course. From Myhutan, Climate Action, Hakam Youth, and the Loud Asians, who design really good infographics. So you can definitely go to their Instagram and see how they use infographics in a way to advocate for an environmental issue. So visualizing news, data, and facts is going to be something that is an art form in itself. Everyone can tweet about a news article, but there's an art into it. So when you're describing environmental degradation, you have to use in a way that people can instantly imagine. For example, how much forest is lost in the Kuala Langat North Forest Reserve. 500 hectares being lost is equivalent to how much Bukit Jalil stadiums, or how many football fields, or the size of Singapore, perhaps, because a lot of conservation-based projects love to use Singapore as an example of how much forest they have or will they lose. One of the most creative way that Malaysia Kini and other news articles are doing, or even NGOs are doing, they are comparing forest loss to how much the size of Putrajaya is. So for example, 500 hectares of forest loss in Kelantan is equivalent to the size of how many Putrajaya, right? So that's how you can let people imagine how much an area is being lost to deforestation. People can instantly imagine without being so mathematically troubled, right? I hate maths, so I don't want to imagine how much is 500 hectares. So if I imagine 27 Stadium Bukit Jalil being lost because of deforestation, That is a huge area. Of course, when you're tweeting about or posting about news, never ever copy the headlines only. Of course, you can use headlines as the caption, but never only use that. So Twitter has a character limit of 240 character limit. So how can you summarize that article within 240 characters is really important, right? So we know that when people are posting news, people seldom read the headlines only and continue to retweet it without reading the article. So it's important for you to take this advantage by summarizing what is in the article as your caption for Facebook and Twitter. Never just copy and paste the headlines. That's a huge mistake. You need to summarize what's happening in the article within the character limit of Twitter and Facebook. But of course, when you're visualizing news, data, and facts, you have to be angry. You have to be personal, but most importantly, accessible and approachable. For example, you can highlight in your caption for Twitter what animals or species are being threatened by this project. Are they endangered? Are they on the brink of extinction? What human rights are being threatened? Is it access to food security? Is it access to water and sanitation? What communities are being violated? Is it the Orang Asli? Is it the stateless people? Is it children? For example, one of the best ways to communicate about climate change is, of course, through the lens of children, because it is an immediate reaction to care for children. In a recent report by UNICEF, which has garnered a lot of attention, UNICEF Malaysia specifically, says that 58% of indigenous children can only attend school during conditions of extreme weather pattern by climate change. So 58% of indigenous children can only attend school because when floods happen, when droughts happen, when landslides happen, their roads are cut off and they can't go to school. So this is the kind of perspective that you have to give into play, where people can feel an emotional attachment to that story, to feel like they want to do some form of action. And of course, this is to create inclusive content for social media is, of course, to use alt text. Alt text is actually what we're striving for at Myhutan right now when we're building social media engagement, because we realize that a lot of social media platforms provide this service. Alt text is a feature on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter to make images accessible to those who are blind and those who have low vision. It is a good image. Good image descriptions help people understand what's happening in the picture. Any form of visual advocacy needs to be accessible as possible. So the nearest example that I can give to you is this post that we did at Myhutan called My Bio, where it is a monthly release where we post content and information about flora and fauna in Malaysia. So you can see here, to write an alt text, you have to be descriptive. For example, you have to put what is in that picture inside this alt text. For example, Myhutan presents My Bio, name Malayan flying fox, keluang, and it's its scientific name. So how can you be descriptive in this alt text, in this image, is by saying it's a visual element. So this visual element, I am describing it by saying this is a large bat roosting. So those who are blind and those who have low vision can immediately know that this picture has a picture of a large bat that is roosting, and that when they think about the Malayan flying fox and the keluang, it immediately says that this is a large bat species. So it's really important to use alt text because you want to be as inclusive as possible. Sustainability needs to be inclusive as possible. This is a flaw that I have made to not make my content on Twitter accessible. But I am encouraging my peers at Myhutan to continuously provide alt text services on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram for our content. So a lot of people don't know about this, but K-pop movements, if you love K-pop or K-pop fan bases, is the largest climate advocacy movement on social media, one of the largest. This is because only this year, Blackpink, if you know and love them, Blackpink is a K-pop movement, K-pop girl group, an all-girls group of K-pop. So they were recently appointed as the official United Nations advocates for the COP26. So COP26 is the Conference of Parties on its 26th year that is happening in Glasgow, Scotland. So it is when every year world leaders, organizations, activists, and people of interest come together to talk about the climate crisis. So recently, Blackpink has been appointed as their ambassador for COP26. So this has sparked a lot of blinks. I hope I'm not butchering. So blinks, right? They're called blinks. So a lot of blinks have started using social media, Twitter especially, by using the hashtag climate action in your area, as opposed to Blackpink in your area. So climate action in your area is one of the largest hashtags used during COP26 on Twitter. So a lot of Blackpink fans have started to show support to Blackpink by doing initiatives like planting trees, participating in COP26, using the hashtags, donating to fundraisers, and promoting COP26 content. I've even been reached out by the official fan base of Malaysia for Blackpink to do a talk with them about climate change. So it's really powerful how a K-pop movement is mobilizing climate advocacy online. It's really important that in communications, we capitalize on this. We make use that K-pop and its fan base can deliver awareness, can deliver action, can deliver solutions, can be a part of decision making. In fact, there is a quote by K-pop movements on climate advocacy that says, "No K-pop on a dead planet." So that's really a powerful sentiment that is being used for climate justice movements, saying, for example, they say, "No Beyonce on a dead planet." No Siti Nurhaliza on a dead planet. So no K-pop on a dead planet, because we are reaching on the brink of human extinction if we continue to allow the climate crisis to come. So the power of K-pop in climate advocacy on social media is something that you can definitely go and look into by searching the hashtag climate action in your area. It's really good, and it's really a good case study if you're a communication student. So networking is key, of course. You cannot do content alone, and you can't do partnerships. You can't do advocacy alone. You need NGOs with you. You constantly and continuously need young people from other organizations to give perspective. So of course, the first step that I would recommend is to volunteer, support any youth-led movement that caters to your academic experience. For example, if you're a political science student, Undi 18 is very into political engagement. So Undi 18 has Myhutan. So Myhutan is a space for you to go into political engagement for forest conservation. Malaysian Youth Delegation is very focused on policy making. If you're a public policy student, administration student at any university, definitely go to MYD. If you're into grassroots, you're into localizing approaches, you're into justice, environmental justice, you're into going to actual sites of deforestation, you're into making sure that environmentalism isn't just limited to Bahasa Inggeris, it's also translated and being approached in Bahasa Melayu. There's always Kuasa, Persatuan Aktivis Sahabat Alam, who's doing great work in grassroots movements, but also tackling solutions and issues. Of course, there's other organizations like Project Vocal, and most notably Climate Action, who has sent Weaving Hopes to COP26. So they have representatives from Weaving Hopes, which is powered by Climate Action, actually at COP26. So it's really important to network with these organizations for collaborations, events. Today, we have multitudes of organizations with you. So that is already an example of networking. Solidarity is also important. We recognize that when problems arise, solidarity is important. For example, at the Kuala Lumpur North Forest Reserve, a coalition was built. A coalition was organized consisting of Climate Action, Persatuan Aktivis Sahabat Alam, and other organizations as well. But of course, networking is important to promote inclusion of vulnerable and marginalized groups, to make sure that they have a seat at the table, to be decision makers, leaders, and policy makers. So what can you do today that makes a difference tomorrow? So there's this petition that needs signing called to save the Shah Alam Community Forest, or the Bukit Charaka Forest Reserve. You can use this link to sign the petition. It's still an ongoing battle. So definitely do that later if you're free. And of course, one of the because we're talking about social media has a organization called Project Youth on Instagram, and they have a template in their bio or in their link tree where you can use that template to email to your members of parliament, to your aduns, to your politicians. It's important that you network with politicians. It's recently until now that we have started to email, to DM, to tag our ministers, our politicians, and our members of parliament. Please email your members of parliament when you're seeing any environmental issue that needs to be addressed in parliament. There's so much little content that is being brought to parliament. We still don't have a special committee of environment in parliament. We don't have a special caucus on environment at parliament. Environmental issues is least talked about in parliament. And when they're talked about, the topic of this discussion is lightly touched. There's very few representation of women during that topic. So please encourage your members of parliament. If you're from Wang Semanju, who's your member of parliament? If you're from Kota Baru, who's your member of parliament? Contact them, talk to them, email them, network with them. So this is how you can contact me, most definitely. So this is my contact. So you can definitely reach out to me here on my social media platforms, Twitter, Instagram, as well as Myhutan's email address. So any questions you want to ask regarding advocacy, you can always ask me or any of the other speakers today. So thank you so much for this opportunity. Remember to be as inclusive, accessible, and as vocal as possible against the climate crisis and any other forms of environmental degradation. Thank you so much.